Energy is kind of the focal point of organisms and their interaction with one another and interaction with their environment. Energy is something that is inherently abundant in the universe on its own, and living organisms are doing their best to obtain this energy and perform some sort of work, whether that be chemical work or physical work or psychological work, that allows organisms to survive and pass on their DNA to the next generation of organisms who will hopefully use that available energy in the universe again in order to keep the ancestral line of that specific species going in the future. So if you think of it big picture, ecology is the study of organisms and their interaction with the living and non-living things in the environment. But in between the lines, it's really the interaction of organisms with other forms of energy, both living and non-living, in their environment. All organisms are trying to do is obtain energy and use energy as efficiently as possible for survival. One of the crazy things about energy in the universe, of which there's a crazy amount of, energy is generally disordered. Energy is usually in a form that cannot be used to do meaningful work for living organisms. The form of living organisms in evolutionary history has been to find novel ways to harness that energy in that disordered form and to make that disordered energy into a ordered form at which can be used to make stuff happen in a controlled way. So again, entropy is the level of disorder in the universe, and the level of disorder in the universe is generally high, and the level of entropy in organisms is very low. And if you would imagine that if entropy is favored by the universe, then it would be very difficult for energy to be harnessed. And that is why most of the energy in the universe is not bound within living organisms. Although, again, living organisms have found novel ways to use energy, whether that be chemical energy, physical energy, or whatnot. Energy in the universe, universally in a physics kind of way, energy is the ability of something to cause change. It's the ability of an object to move from one position to another. It's the ability of one molecule to cause the resonating of another. It's the ability of one object to heat another object. Biologically, energy is the ability for organisms to use something in order to perform some function that can be necessary for the cell, or for the organism, or for the tissue, or for the behavior. So really what we're talking about here is the interaction between physics energy and biological energy, and how that manifests itself in the relationship between organisms. But generally, energy is something that is important for organisms. It is obtained for organisms in their environment. And when we say that ecology is the interaction between organisms and their environment, it's really all about the use of energy in some form. So if we continue along here, the 99.999% of the energy source used for biological organisms comes from photons and electromagnetic energy that was emitted from the sun. So what we're really talking about is, we're actually really looking small here. We're talking just about the energy of the Earth. the 99% of all the energy used on Earth comes from light, photon energy, which comes from the sun. Remember, a photon is a particle of energy that is manifested as light, that acts as a wave, and can cause change on other things. Specifically the photosynthetic organisms. But before we get there, there's a very small group of organisms called chemosynthetic organisms that don't use light for energy. They can use chemicals like sulfur and phosphorus and sometimes nitrogen in order to carry out their biochemical processes. These are usually single-celled organisms in hydrothermal vents of the deep, deep ocean called thermophiles or chemophiles, usually the archaea. Again, we stated that energy is lost as entropy. All right, entropy is the loss of energy from a usable form, order, to a unusable form, disorder, and it really gets lost anytime an energy exchange occurs. There's a loss of energy. For example, when a photon travels from the sun to the Earth, it loses energy to the environment as it's traveling, and then when it hits something, the thing it hits usually absorbs some of that energy, so the photon that bounces off will actually have less. So, during every interaction of energy, energy is lost as disorder to the universe. Okay? That's important. Which makes energy a very limiting thing if it's always being lost as disorder and unusable. If we look in a really small, minute, microscopic example, the point of DNA is to tell cells to carry out functions that allow it to harness energy in the best way possible. These instructions then result in the interaction of cells, which are behaving in a specific way, which then, through systems like the nervous system and tissues and the circulatory system, all right, and the digestive system, all manifest themselves in a way that may allow a multicellular organism to have something like behavior. One thing I'm showing you here, this is an enzyme. It's made of protein, and proteins are made of amino acids. This enzyme is a small machine, a non-living machine, that uses the interaction of hydrogen ions flowing through it in order to spin in circles and produce massive amounts of ATP. All right. One of the most important rules in biology, and specifically, most importantly in our study of ecology, is the 10% rule. All right. From one organism's flesh to another organism's flesh, from one organism's system to another organism's system, all right, the transfer of energy is only 10% of that initial energy. For example, let's say you have 1,000,000 joules of sunlight that enter a system. All right. Most of that energy is unavailable to living organisms because some of that light, energy of sunlight, is being reflected. Some of it is being absorbed. 10,000 of it is being absorbed. All right. And a lot of it is being lost to entropy or disorder of the universe. All right. So when you transfer the raw energy of sunlight to living organisms like plants, which are the only things that are able to take in sunlight, you lose 90% of the energy. And from all the energy in the photons to the energy of the flesh of plants, you only have 10% of that energy. Now remember, plants are using most of this energy for biochemical processes. They're using it to make ATP. They're using it to grow. And some of it is also being lost to the universe, because remember, during all the chemical reactions that are going on in this plant, some of it is being lost to the universe as entropy or disorder, remember. So, if the insect eats an entire plant, it only gets 10% of the total energy that that plant had. Some of the energy is lost to the universe. Some of that energy is lost to produce energy for the insect itself. Some of the energy is being lost in inefficiency of digestion. All right? And then a mouse or something eats the insect. That mouse will only get 10% of what it ate from the cricket because some of the energy is lost in the transfer. Some of that energy is going to be lost as heat. Some of the energy is going to be used for its own biochemical processes, fur, behavior, reproduction, movement, digestion, inefficiency. And so what this mouse has now, all right, whatever energy it has available, which is a lot of energy, all right, only 10% of that energy is available if it were to be eaten by a snake. All right, so that snake has to eat many of these. All right, this mouse needs to eat many of these, and these crickets need to eat many plants. All right, because we're losing energy through each transfer from one level to another, it results in a very low amount of available energy for the higher order organisms. An eastern cottontail hare eats its poo twice so that it can be as efficient as possible with that energy. Because energy is so limiting, because energy is being lost constantly through transfer, organisms put a high price on how they use it, how they conserve it, and how they obtain it. Because they're going to behave based on energy. We talked about what happens when a north wind comes in. Organisms are often going to feed heavily before storms come in. So what organisms are doing is they're behaving in ways that allow them to obtain energy most efficiently and with the least amount of energy used. Again, conservation of energy is necessary for survival. One of the themes of Marx's Rules of Ecology states that organisms do everything for a reason. All right? For example, red foxes and gray foxes may hibernate during heavy snow because it takes them more energy to walk in the snow than it would be to sleep for 2 weeks before the snow's gone. Now, obtaining energy is also super important because organisms are specifically adapted to obtain energy sources that provide the maximum amount of energy return for them.
It seems that nature abhors adolescent behavior. Sharp-shinned hawks exist, Cooper's hawks, goshawks exist, it seems, to comb adolescent behavior out of the forest during the spring of the year. All they have to do, because they have begging adolescents back at their nest, all they have to do is cruise through the forest, kind of in a glide, looking left and right as they go, listening for that distinctive begging call. Now the mother bird knows the sharp-shinned is coming because the alarm is being broadcast way out in front of the sharp-shinned hawk. The mother knows it's coming, the father knows it's coming, and they quickly hide at the last second. Now the juveniles that pay attention, that aren't too self-absorbed, will notice that the parents have ditched it, listen to the parent's alarm call, and actually pay attention to it and follow the parent bird. But there's usually one sitting out on the branch after everyone ditches it who's more self-absorbed and more concerned about their own needs in the moment than the parents would have approved of, and basically they'll be begging and begging and begging, and then you'll hear a kind of a sudden silence, maybe a little shriek, and a puff of feathers will result as that sharp-shinned hawk takes off with the begging starling. You know, and the amazing thing is, if you watch a sharp-shinned hawk nest for any length of time, you know, during that time of year, say June, it's startling how often the mother and the father, sharp-shinned hawk, bring adolescent birds in, about every 10, 15 seconds sometimes, it seems. They're flying in with another starling. And the thing is, they'll fly in, nail a starling, right in front of all the other starlings, right? So if there's 3 or 4 sibling starlings all begging in the same berry bush to be fed, those 3 or 4 siblings just watch their sister or brother get, you know, taken away by a sharp-shinned hawk. The amazing thing is that those siblings don't learn the lesson. And that sharp-shinned hawk will come right back to that exact location, not 20 seconds later or a minute later, and do the exact same thing with one of the other siblings. So it's not unusual for a parent bird to lose an entire clutch once they go into that adolescent behavior, right? So they have to start all over again. So if you're wondering why it is that you're still finding robin eggs in the month of July, that's part of the explanation, that these robins fall prey to their adolescent behavior. They can't seem to break out of their own self-absorbed needs in the moment long enough to become aware. So that's where the intense awareness of the birds actually begin.
Please be prepared to discuss this mini lecture in class next week. Have a great break.